And so what you can see is pending sales here and closed sales. Now, do you notice any parallels between these two? Okay? Pending sales tend to predict closed sales. And that kind of makes intuitive sense, right? Because you have to put a contract on a house before it closes. So the more that goes in the pipe, the more comes out the pipe. The less that goes in the pipe, the less that comes out the pipe. Now, what happens then if we move, pending sales is the blue line. I realize not everybody can read this. But pending sales is the blue line, and closed sales is the red line. So what happens if we move pending sales over to the right just a little bit? Notice how they map right on top of each other? And again, this makes sense. This shouldn't be counterintuitive. So everything falls right into perspective here. So then what is this? Well, it turns out that pending sales have actually dropped off 50% in Charleston, and not just in Charleston, but in other areas of the state as well, since the expiration of the tax credit. May over April. So 50% lower in May than it was in April. So that means that we need to be prepared for this. This is not a new long-term trend, but it is a new short-term trend. So over the next 2 to 3 months, and you may already be seeing this in July in terms of your sales levels, closed sales are going to drop because the pending sales are dropping. Again, South Carolina, very similar. And so now you should be able to see that if I move pending sales over to the right, it's going to map right on top of sales here. Now that graph turns out it's not correct. I don't know why it dropped off, but it should only be going down to about 3,000 here. So. But the question then is, how long is that going to last? And I can't put a specific number on that, but what I can say is that it's going to be over the next few months as the market stabilizes. All right, so we need to be prepared for that, not in terms of being pessimistic for long term, but in knowing that that's coming. So looking at pending sales can help us plan for closed sales, which is coming down the pipe a little bit. All right, another thing I want to talk about then is price appreciation and price depreciation. One of the things that MLS statistics I find are used for sometimes and used incorrectly for is to look at house price appreciation and house price depreciation. So I want to give you an example of why they don't correlate one to one. So as an example of that, let's look at 3 different houses. All right, so an example, we have sales in 2007. Let's just assume that we have 3 house sales in 2007. One house sells for $185,000, one house sells for $190,000, and one house sells for $195,000. So you get an average price of $190,000. Pretty simple. Now let's say that those same 3 houses, house 1, 2, and 3, sell in 2009 again. This time for $180,000, $185,000, and $190,000. So the average price is now $185,000. So then the question is, the average price dropped from $190,000 to $185,000. So is that price depreciation or is that a price shift? That's price depreciation. How do we know? Well, it's about 2.6%. That's really not important. But how do we know it's a price depreciation? It's because we're looking at the same 3 houses in 2007 that resold in 2009 for a cheaper price. Now let's contrast that to example 2. So now we have house 1, house 2, and house 3, and selling for the same prices, an average price of $190,000 in 2007. But if we look at 2009, now we see house 4 selling for $180,000, house 5 for $185,000, house 6 for $190,000. So we get an average price of $185,000. Now we're talking about a price depreciation or a price shift. Talking about a price shift. So the fact that the average price went down in 2009 relative to 2007 doesn't say anything about house 1, 2, and 3. Does that make sense? We can infer that house 1, 2, and 3 has gone down in value based on sales in 2009. All right, so let's take this example and let's use real-world data to correlate that. Well, we have the FHFA here, and we have MLS statistics. The FHFA is the Federal Housing Finance Agency, and that's the government agency that actually looks at house-over-house price changes over time. They have a very advanced modeling system that they use to calculate this, and anybody can go to the website and look at price changes over time. Now, the FHFA is reflected in red. That reflects our price appreciation or depreciation. The MLS is the brown bar. That represents the price shift. So, what does this graph tell us? It tells us that according to the MLS, the average prices dropped far more in 2009 over 2008 than prices actually depreciated. So that's actually very good news. But what does that mean for the MLS? What is that telling us? Well, the MLS is telling us what people are buying. So it's telling us that people are buying cheaper houses. Okay, so why is that the case? It's because they're very uncertain. They're becoming more fiscally responsible because they have to be. They don't know if they're going to have a job. So if they're buying at all, they want a bargain. They want a deal. They don't want to spend any more than they absolutely have to. That's what this is showing us. So you can see in South Carolina, there's a dramatic difference between the preferred price of buyers and the actual depreciation in South Carolina. So looking at 09 over 08, we saw that the South Carolina depreciation level was about negative 0.2%. So in other words, house prices declined overall about 0.2%. But the median price of homes sold fell by about 8.5%. Okay, that's 2009 over 2008. Now let's look at 2010 over 2009. And what you're going to see is these brown bars are essentially going to go away and actually have increased slightly, but the red bars pretty much stay in place. Everybody agree with that assessment? That's about what happened? So what this is saying is that as we got into 2010, these are year-to-date figures, by the way. As we got into 2010, that depreciation rate has stayed relatively constant while we reached somewhat of a new equilibrium encouraged by the tax credit in terms of house prices that consumers prefer. So that's what we're seeing here. So the median price of homes sold rose by about 1.4% in 2010, and South Carolina overall, the depreciation value was about 3.1%. And to put that into perspective, North Carolina was about 5%, and in Georgia, about 6.5%, 6.4%. And the level of error denotes the additional depreciation there. Okay, so why should we be optimistic? Well, it turns out that there are a lot of good reasons to be optimistic. The first is, if we look at prices and income trends, there's a rule of thumb that you all are, I'm sure, aware of, that when you're looking to buy a house, you typically look no more than 3 times your annual income level. So if I make $50,000 a year, I can afford a house $150,000 or less, roughly. Well, if we look at this, plot this over time in the different markets, you can see that in the early 2000s, when the boom really took off, that ratio really rose. It got above 3. That's not the sign of a healthy market. So it was almost inevitable that that would have to come back down. And it has started coming back down. And you can see on the market here, that price-to-income ratio level 3, that's dropping. That's a very positive sign, a very healthy sign that our market is getting better. If we look at national inventory levels are falling. Not falling as fast as we all might like, but they are falling. You can see here that the month supply of existing single-family homes nationally has actually fallen. The left shows the month supply, the right shows the actual level. So you can actually see that from late 2008, we've decreased from about an 11-month to about a 7.5 month supply. Once you get down to about 6 months, 5 to 6 month range, that's healthy for a market. So this is actually very positive news that our inventory levels are decreasing. Inventory of new homes also decreasing. Not quite as substantially, but again, going from 12 to about 9 months there. Again, like here, you can see how the blue line has dropped since 2008. So inventory levels are falling. Now, I go back to job growth because this is extremely important. Arguably one of the most important statistics to look for housing demand in the future. So what we're looking for then is how employment has been changing over time. We're going to see really strong improvements in the market once we get year-over-year job growth changes. So in other words, if we look at each industry and look at where we were a year ago, and if we've seen continuous growth since then we know we're onto something in terms of long-term job growth, long-term job creation. But the good news is that in almost every major sector, we have seen increases in Q1 2010 over Q4 2009, and then again here, as you can see, Q2 2010 over Q1 2010. So we're seeing increases in job growth. Now, the caveat to that is you don't see job growth figures very often. What you see is the unemployment rate, and you see that fluctuating, right? You can see that in the news all the time. So the important thing to realize about the unemployment rate is that it can fluctuate based on things other than this variable. This is what's important. This is what matters. Getting more people working. When you see the unemployment rate, that variable can also go down because of the size of the labor force. So